Before Hollywood devoured her, Dorothy Stratten was just Dorothy Ruth Hoogstraten, a teenage girl from British Columbia working behind a Dairy Queen counter. Soft serve, small town life, and no idea that fame was about to come dressed in flashbulbs, satin, and bad intentions. Then Paul Snider walked in, wearing desperation dressed as ambition. He was flashy, older, hungry to be somebody, and the second he saw Dorothy, he didn't just see a pretty girl, he saw a ticket out. Paul didn't simply flirt with Dorothy. He started shaping the fantasy, the clothes, the photos, the dream, the whole glossy little machine. That's the first dirty secret. Dorothy's discovery wasn't magic. It was strategy with cologne on. The photos were the bait. Playboy was the hook. Reports say Snider arranged photos of Dorothy and sent them to Playboy. And when her mother wouldn't sign the release, he allegedly signed it himself. A forged signature, a stack of pictures, and Dorothy was suddenly headed toward the empire. Hugh Hefner saw the photos, and Dorothy was flown to Los Angeles in August 1978. 1 minute, Dairy Queen in suburbia. The next, mansion gates, camera flashes, and men in power deciding what kind of fantasy she should become. Even her name got a makeover. Dorothy Ruth Hoogstraten became Dorothy Stratten. Cleaner, shorter, easier to print, sell, and put under lights. The real girl was being polished into a product, and everyone wanted a piece. Playboy didn't just discover Dorothy. It dressed her in destiny. She had the perfect backstory. Innocent Canadian beauty plucked from ordinary life and dropped into a world of champagne, satin, cameras, and men who smiled like contracts. In June 1979, Dorothy married Paul Snider. The red flag got a ring. Underneath the Vegas sparkle was something much darker: gratitude, obligation, and a man who seemed to believe that because he found her, he owned her. As Dorothy's star rose, Paul's welcome started wearing thin. The mansion loved Dorothy. Paul was becoming the bad smell in the room. Accounts later described him as jealous and controlling, and every bit of her success made him look smaller beside her. Then came 1980. Dorothy became Playmate of the Year, and Hollywood started paying attention. She wasn't just a centerfold anymore. She was acting, glowing, moving upward. Paul wasn't rising with her. He was cracking in the shadow she was casting. So part 1 ends here. Dorothy Stratten is becoming a star, and Paul Snider is becoming a warning. Playboy had crowned her, Hollywood was circling, and one powerful director was about to walk into her life. And that is where the fantasy gets even messier in part 2. Dorothy Stratten was no longer just the blonde in the magazine. By 1980, she was becoming a Hollywood possibility. Soft-spoken, camera-ready, and marketable. To the world, she looked like a star being born. To the men around her, she looked like access, status, and control, wrapped in gold. Then Peter Bogdanovich entered the picture. Older, famous, and powerful enough to change a career with one phone call. Dorothy was only 20. He cast her in They All Laughed, placing her beside Audrey Hepburn, John Ritter, and the Hollywood glow Paul Snider could not buy. The movie set became more than a movie set. Dorothy and Bogdanovich grew close, while her marriage to Paul fell apart. Her acting break turned into tabloid dynamite. Young starlet, famous director, jealous husband, and a romantic comedy curdling behind the curtain. Paul had sold himself as the man who discovered Dorothy. But discovery only feels good while you still own the map. As Dorothy's world got bigger, Paul's got smaller. Her goals changed. Her future changed. He was pushed out of the spotlight he thought she owed him. The mansion was sold as a fantasy palace. But fantasy has a staff, a guest list, and politics. Dorothy was adored, displayed, promoted, and watched. Glamour on the outside. Power games underneath. Later, Bogdanovich turned grief into a flamethrower with the killing of the unicorn, blaming the culture around Dorothy and launching accusations Hugh Hefner denied. The claims were explosive. The denials were loud. Dorothy's death became a public war over blame and legacy. By then, Paul was becoming the husband nobody wanted around. Hollywood had a place for Dorothy. Playboy had a place for Dorothy. Bogdanovich had a place for Dorothy. Paul had a problem. The fairy tale he thought he owned had no room. Then came the surveillance. As Dorothy tried to move forward, Paul reportedly hired a private investigator to keep tabs on her. This is where gossip stops sparkling and starts smelling like danger. This was control in a trench coat, watching from across the street. Everybody had a version of Dorothy. Bogdanovich saw the muse. Snider saw the wife he was losing. Hollywood saw the next blonde dream. Playboy saw a golden girl. But Dorothy was alive, still young, still trying to become herself. After her death, they all laughed, stopped feeling like a romantic comedy, and started feeling haunted. The title promised laughter. What remained was heartbreak. Even after Dorothy was gone, the fight kept going. Bogdanovich blamed the glamour machine. Hefner denied the worst claims. Dorothy's name became a battlefield for powerful men trying to rewrite what happened. And while Dorothy was walking toward freedom, Paul was still waiting in the dark. She had the movie, the spotlight, and a future opening in front of her. He had jealousy, desperation, and the sickening feeling he was being erased. Dorothy thought she was heading toward a clean break, but the final act was closing in. Dorothy was trying to step out of the fantasy and into freedom. She had the movie, the attention, the director, the future. Paul Snider had the divorce papers, the jealousy, and the sick little feeling that his golden ticket was walking away. Dorothy wasn't storming out with a matchbook and a revenge dress. She was trying to leave cleanly. She wanted the marriage untangled, the money settled, the drama finished. Even at the end, she was still trying to be kind to a man who had mistaken kindness for ownership. August 14th, 1980. Dorothy went to Paul's rented house in West Los Angeles. Not Canada, not the mansion, not some glamorous Hollywood palace. A regular house, a closed door, and a meeting that was supposed to settle the separation. But behind that door, the fantasy went rotten. Paul had bought a 12-gauge shotgun the day before and reportedly told friends he was going hunting. Police later said the killing included sexual assault before he shot Dorothy, then himself. It was brutal, ugly, and nothing like the dreamy version Hollywood had been selling. And then came the second violation, the magazines. Hustler published a grotesque spoof of Playboy's old "What Sort of Man Reads Playboy" ads, using a staged murder scene image to jab at Playboy and squeeze shock value from Dorothy's death. That wasn't journalism. That was the scandal industry licking the plate. Dorothy was only 20. 20. Old enough to be marketed as a fantasy. Young enough that she should have had decades left to become whoever she wanted. Actress, traveler, sister, daughter, woman. Instead, the world froze her in a headline. The press turned vicious fast. Her death became copy, covers, gossip, speculation, and moral panic. Everybody wanted the dirt. Everybody wanted the angle. Dorothy had been turned into a product in life, and somehow, death didn't stop the cash register from ringing. Playboy mourned its golden girl, but the mourning still came wrapped in branding. She was remembered as beautiful, tragic, iconic. But under all that black ribbon and candlelight was the harder truth. A young woman trying to escape control was failed by nearly every room she walked into. They all laughed became haunted. What should have been Dorothy's Hollywood launch turned into a ghost reel. A romantic comedy with Audrey Hepburn and John Ritter now carried the shadow of the woman who never got to see what came next. Then Hollywood did what Hollywood does. It rewrote her. Books, films, gossip columns, and Star 80 turned Dorothy into symbol, warning, muse, victim, legend. But before all that, she was just Dorothy, a young woman with curls, ambition, softness, and a future stolen in the cruelest final act. And then came the epilogue nobody forgot. Years after Dorothy's death, Peter Bogdanovich married her younger sister, Louise Stratten, and Hollywood did what Hollywood always does. It stared, whispered, and turned a private wound into public fascination. To some, it looked romantic. To others, it felt strange as hell. Either way, it became one of the story's most uncomfortable footnotes. Proof that even after Dorothy was gone, the people around her were still rewriting the ending. Which brings us to the ugliest question of all. Who failed Dorothy? Paul Snider failed her with jealousy, control, and violence. The industry failed her by profiting from her youth and beauty, while offering very little real protection. The press failed her by devouring the tragedy, like it was gossip with better lighting. And the powerful men around her all seemed to want a piece of her story, while almost nobody truly had her back. So strip away the myth. Take away the mansion glow, the tabloid filth, the camera flashes, the sleazy fantasy machine. Dorothy was not just a symbol, not just a scandal, not just some doomed blonde men could project their fantasies onto. She was a real young woman, soft and bright and ambitious, with a life that should have belonged to her. And that is what makes it so brutal. Dorothy was only 20 years old. At 20, she had already become a model, a playmate, and an actress with real momentum. She had beauty, yes, but also charm, instinct, and that rare star quality that makes a room stop breathing for a second. She was at the start, not the end. That is the heartbreak. Her future was not fading. It was just beginning. In the final role, the fantasy goes dark. No more silk robes. No more men claiming they loved her best. No more industry spin. Just the truth sitting there in the quiet. Dorothy Stratten was more than a centerfold, more than a murder headline, more than a Hollywood ghost story. She was a 20-year-old woman with a future, and the deepest tragedy is how many people saw her shine before anyone truly protected her. And that is the end, but not really, because her story still lives on, not as cheap scandal, not as a punchline, not as a cautionary prop for other people's morality play. It lives on because Dorothy mattered. She deserved more time, more safety, more honesty, and a life beyond the hungry hands that kept trying to define her. So remember the woman, not just the myth. Remember the light, not just the darkness that swallowed it.
A mansion of silk and cigars was stuffed full of creeps chasing stars. They toasted her fame, then dirtied her name like goblins with black Amex cards.